Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 231. Chapter 231. Helene, having returned with the court from Vilna to Petersburg, found herself in a difficult position. In Petersburg, she had enjoyed the special protection of a grandee who occupied one of the highest posts in the empire. In Vilna, she had formed an intimacy with a young foreign prince. When she returned to Petersburg, both the magnate and the prince were there, and both claimed their rights. Helene was faced by a new problem: how to preserve her intimacy with both without offending either. What would have seemed difficult or even impossible to another woman did not in the least cause embarrassment to Countess Bezzukova, who evidently deserved her reputation of being a very clever woman. Had she attempted concealment or tried to extricate herself from her awkward position by cunning, she would have spoiled her case by acknowledging herself guilty. But Helene, like a really great man who can do whatever he pleases, at once assumed her own position to be correct, as she sincerely believed it would be, and that everyone else was to blame. The first time the young foreigner allowed himself to reproach her, she shifted her beautiful head and, half turning to him, said firmly, "That's just like a man, selfish and cruel. I expected nothing else. A woman sacrifices herself for you. She suffers, and this is her reward? What right you have to demand an account of my attachments and friendships? He is a man who has been a lot more than a father to me." The prince was about to say something, but Helene interrupted him. "Well, yes," said she. "It may be that he has other sentiments for me than those of a father, but that is not a reason for me to shut my door to him. I am not a man that I should repay kindness with ingratitude. No, monseigneur. That in all that relates to my intimate feelings I render account only to God and to my conscience," she concluded, laying her hand on her beautiful, fully expanded bosom and looking up to heaven. "But for heaven's sake, listen to me. Marry me, and I will be your slave." "But that's impossible." "You wouldn't deign to demean yourself by marrying me. You," said Helene, beginning to cry. The prince tried to comfort her, but Helene, as if quite distraught, said through her tears that there was nothing to prevent her marrying, that there were precedents. There were up to that time very few, but she mentioned Napoleon and some other exalted personages, that she had never been her husband's wife, and that she had been sacrificed. "But the law, religion," said the prince, already yielding. "The law, religion. What have they been invented for if they can't arrange that?" said Helene. The prince was surprised that so simple an idea had not occurred to him, and he applied for advice to the holy brethren of the Society of Jesus, with whom he was on intimate terms. A few days later, at one of those enchanting fêtes which Helene gave at her country house on the Stone Island, the charming Monsieur de Joubert, a man no longer young, with snow-white hair and brilliant black eyes, a Jesuit à robe courte, was presented to her, and in the garden by the light of the illuminations and to the sound of music talked to her for a long time of the love of God, of Christ, of the Sacred Heart, and of the consolations the one true Catholic religion affords in the world and in the next. Helene was touched, and more than once tears rose to her eyes, and to those of Monsieur de Joubert, and their voices trembled. A dance, for which her partner came to seek her, put an end to her discourse with her future. But the next evening, Monsieur de Joubert came to see Helene when she was alone, and after that came again. One day he took the Countess to a Roman Catholic church, where she knelt down before the altar to which she was led. The enchanting middle-aged Frenchman laid his hands on her head, and, as she herself afterwards described it, she felt something like a fresh breeze wafted into her soul. It was explained to her that this was la grâce. After that, a long-frocked abbé was brought to her. She confessed to him, and he absolved her from all her sins. Next day, she received a box containing the sacred host, which was left at her house for her to partake of. A few days later, Helene learned with pleasure that she had now been admitted to the true Catholic Church, and that in a few days the Pope himself would hear of her and would send her a certain document. All that was done around her and to her at this time, all the attention devoted to her by so many clever men and expressed in such pleasant, refined ways, and the state of dove-like purity she was now in, she wore only white dresses and white ribbons all the time, gave her pleasure. But her pleasure did not cause her for a moment to forget her aim. And as it always happens in contests of cunning that a stupid person gets the better of the cleverer ones, Helene, having realized that the main object of all these words and all this trouble was, after converting her to Catholicism, to obtain money from her for Jesuit institutions, as to which she received indications, before parting with her money, insisted that the various operations necessary to free her from her husband should be performed. In her view, the aim of every religion was merely to preserve certain proprieties while affording satisfaction to human desires. And with this aim, in one of her talks with her father confessor, she insisted on an answer to the question in how far she was bound by her marriage. They were sitting in the twilight by a window in the drawing-room. The scent of flowers came in at the window. Helene was wearing a white dress, transparent over her shoulders and bosom. The abbé, a well-fed man with a plump, clean-shaven chin, a pleasant, firm mouth, and white hands meekly folded on his knees, sat close to Helene, and, with a subtle smile on his lips and a peaceful look of delight at her beauty, occasionally glanced at her face, as he explained his opinion on the subject. Helene, with an uneasy smile, looked at his curly hair and his plump, clean-shaven, blackish cheeks, and in every moment expected the conversation to take a fresh turn. But the abbé, though he evidently enjoyed the beauty of his companion, was absorbed in his mastery of the matter. The course of the father confessor's arguments ran as follows. Ignorant of the import of what you were undertaking, you made a vow of conjugal fidelity to a man who, on his part, by entering the married state without faith in the religious significance of marriage, committed an act of sacrilege. That marriage lacked the dual significance it should have had. Yet, in spite of this, your vow was binding. You swerved from it. What did you commit by so acting? A venial or a mortal sin? A venial sin, for you acted without evil intention. If now you married again with the object of bearing children, your sin might be forgiven. But the question is again a twofold one. Firstly, but suddenly Helene, who was getting bored, said with one of her bewitching smiles, But I think that having espoused the true religion, I cannot be bound by what a false religion laid upon me. The director of her conscience was astounded at having the case presented to him thus with the simplicity of Columbus's egg. He was delighted at the unexpected rapidity of his pupil's progress, but could not abandon the edifice of argument he had laboriously constructed. Let us understand one another, Countess, said he with a smile, and began refuting his spiritual daughter's arguments. All right, that concludes my reading of chapter 231. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, day 231. Keep. Pierre, just like Napoleon, who he feels so connected to, will soon be fighting a war on two fronts. He's well aware of the carnage of the battlefield. Little does he know, however, that back at the home front, his wife is preparing an attack that could prove just as devastating to him as the French assault on Borodino proved to the Russian army. While her husband is off fighting the war, Helene is trapezing around Vilna and Petersburg with the slyness of a fox and the libido of an unabatedly onanistic chimpanzee. While in Petersburg, she shacked up with a high-ranking imperial official, while in Vilna with a young prince. One would assume that in 19th century Russian society, the open practice of playboy mensch and grotto-sexual mores would dampen one's reputation. Helene doesn't seem to mind, though. She's not embarrassed in the least. The problem, as she sees it, isn't how best to keep her relationships from the light of society, but rather how to bestow upon them some legitimacy. For that project, naturally, she turns to the Roman Catholic Church. Her idea is to convert to that religion in order to have her marriage to Pierre annulled. The Church is perfectly willing to go along. The Pope himself will send her a document concerning the process. Pierre, when he returns from Borodino, has some choices to make. Clearly, he has made a mistake in marrying Helene. If he's truly interested in improving himself, he's going to need to surround himself with a better class of people moving forward, because the company you keep ends up keeping you. Daily meditation. In the garden of thy heart, plant not but the rose of love, and from the nightingale of affection and desire loosen not thy hold. Treasure the companionship of the righteous, and eschew all fellowship with the ungodly. Bahá'u'lláh, The Hidden Words. All right, so that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 231. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining me. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation to PayPal. The links to all that are down below in the show notes. Tomorrow, we will be reading and reflecting on chapter 232 of War and Peace. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.